DFS. It is Friday, October 28th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 8 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Small. And Jared, welcome to Sam Ehlinger week, huh?
Yeah, we're doing it. Ehlinger and cash. And it's obviously less about what he's going to do for us versus, what he allows us to get at the other positions. And there are a lot of high-priced guys I think we want to get in our cash lineups this week. So $4,000 Sam Ehlinger. And I think what makes me feel better about him is I do think he's going to give us some rushing production. He ran in college. He's ran in the preseason. And then, passing-wise, we'll see. I mean, he, as we said yesterday, he did have a good preseason. The Colts obviously have some optimism about him. I think it's more likely than not he ends up as like a below-average NFL passer. But he has decent weapons, and he has a good matchup against Washington. 31st in adjusted points allowed to quarterback. So I think he can do enough passing to pay off this minimum-priced salary on DraftKings.
Yeah, like you said, this is not a matter of betting that he's going to be good this week. It's he's only $4,000 and he's a starting quarterback. This might be the lowest dollars per point we've ever seen since we started supporting this. That's not something that I track, so I have no idea if that's true. But there have not been a whole lot of 4K quarterbacks along the way. Kevin Hogan always jumps to mind as an example, and one that did not work out. But that was an emergency situation for the Browns, as opposed to the Colts saying, we're going to sit down Matt Ryan this week and give Sam Ehlinger a shot. So that, I think, at least means that they don't think it's a step down from what Matt Ryan is, and there's a chance it's an upgrade. You mentioned the rushing. Ehlinger is also thrown well in, the very limited exposure we've seen at this, near NFL level, because all we have is preseason to go on. 24 of 29 passing in this preseason. He had 9.97 yards per attempt, 13.8% touchdown rate. So again, I'm not taking that and watch out, Sam Ehlinger's, ready to take the NFL by storm, but it at least means he's shown the team some stuff. Maybe he even supports Michael Pittman in this game. And that's the other thing, is he does have Michael Pittman on his side. He does have Jonathan Taylor. There might even be some Naheem Hines cameos, although not nearly as much as we'd like. And the matchup is Washington, fourth most friendly to quarterback scoring. Plus, there's the experienced offensive coach, Frank Reich, who himself was an NFL quarterback for a long time. So, it's a good situation for this quarterback who is 4K. A pretty easy play for our cash lineups here.
Yeah, the other part about it is, to me, there's no one else I'm really interested in playing in cash. Like Jalen Hurts is at his highest price tag of the season at $8,300. He's obviously a fine play. I do worry that could be another game where they're up by 3 scores in the second half and they're not having to use Hurts a whole lot. And then it's like, do you want to pay an extra $1,500 above Ehlinger for Daniel Jones, or you have Geno Smith, Jared Goff up there? Like, there's just no one else I'm super excited to play in cash this week.
Yeah, you look in the lineup generator, and even if you're like, "Ooh, Sam Ehlinger, I can't do that with my money," you look behind him in values, and it's Jared Goff, it's Daniel Jones next. So, are you looking at those guys and oh, thank goodness, there's something much safer behind Sam Ehlinger? No,
right.
You're not doing that. So, GPP side, Jared, who do you like at QB?
Yeah, the first guy that kind of caught my attention as I was, getting ready for the week, back on Monday or Tuesday, was Tua Tagovailoa. It looks like he's going to be popular though. $6,200 coming in at 15% projected ownership. So, we'll see. You can still make Tua tournament lineups and just make sure you get different elsewhere. I do think playing Mike Gesicki with Tua is a way to sort of differentiate those lineups. I do kind of like going to Jared Goff on the other side of that game though. You just mentioned, he's the second best value for us on the slate at just $5,500. We've seen him have some big games this season. He has games of 26 and 37 DraftKings points. And it looks like for the first time since week 1, he's going to have a healthy DeAndre Swift and Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I think, playing the other side of Tua, you could still play one of Tua's wide receivers to, get some of that upside, but then playing Goff with Amon-Ra St. Brown and maybe DeAndre Swift or TJ Hawkinson is a good way to attack tournaments this week.
I agree. I think Jared Goff is my favorite guy at 5,500. You're still getting the salary savings that we're talking about with the 4K guys, so you can still get that upside at other positions. But the matchup is also good here for Jared Goff. Dolphins are 25th in pass defense DVOA, according to Football Outsiders. They're a neutral QB scoring matchup by our adjusted fantasy points allowed, but tied for 6th most points per game allowed to the position, despite having already faced Kenny Pickett, Zach Wilson, and Mac Jones. Miami opponents are passing at the third highest rate over expected for the year, according to our article on DraftSharks.com. Now, a weekly article from Timmy Hernandez, so make sure you check that out. You can also follow him on Twitter at TimboSlice003. You mentioned the guys that go with it. TJ Hawkinson at 4,900. You can stack with Jared Goff. If you do play Goff, I would probably play two of his pass catchers. We've got Hawkinson at single digit ownership projection. We've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's down a little bit in salary from last week. He's projected in double digits, but currently tied for just 11th among wide receivers in ownership projection. So I think you gain a little bit there as well. And you can absorb those Tua teams by playing either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. Can play Mike Gesicki if you want. You can play two of those guys and just like stack up this matchup. You can also play Raheem Mostert on the other side of this. So there's lots of options to play with to build out different rosters as well. So yeah, I really like the idea of playing Jared Goff here. Now, obviously it's Jared Goff. So he might stink on Sunday and let us down, but you know, that's the game here.
Yeah, we don't care about floor in tournaments. We care about the upside. And again, he has shown some upside this season. And I'm with you. I do think Goff is a guy you want to double stack. It's still a pretty concentrated offense if we have a healthy Swift and healthy St. Brown. And you know, Goff obviously is not going to give us anything with his legs. So if he has a big game, he's probably going to bring two of his pass catchers along with him. I also like Kirk Cousins for tournaments, $6,100. He's coming in at just 7% projected ownership. Now, Cousins hasn't really had a tournament winning game yet this season, which is a bit concerning for me in this new offense. The biggest issue for him, though, has been the touchdown rate. It's at 3.9%. He's been 5.8% touchdown rate across his first four seasons in Minnesota. So I do think there's some positive regression coming for him there. And I like this matchup against Arizona. This is another team. We talked about Miami being a team that offenses tend to go pass leaning again. Same thing for Arizona. They're second in pass rate over expected against. Minnesota, by the way, already sixth in pass rate over expected 4. So they're already been a pass leaning offense this season. And then Arizona, 27th in pass defense DVOA, 25th in adjusted fantasy points to quarterback. So it sets up as, you know, one of Cousins' best matchups of the season so far.
Yeah, I like Cousins. I'll be talking about him on the FanDuel portion of this show. One other thing that we haven't mentioned yet about these quarterbacks that I think makes it easier to play Kirk Cousins or Jared Goff is that this is not a great week at quarterback. I mean, that might accentuate the importance of Jalen Hurts, and I'll talk about that on the FanDuel side as well. But behind Jalen Hurts, it's like nobody else here looks like a must-have quarterback. So that's why you can back away from Tua at high ownership and play somebody else that has a similarly wide range of outcomes.
Exactly. Yeah. You're just kind of hoping Hurts doesn't go for like 35. And otherwise, you know, there's probably not going to be like a massive quarterback game this week.
Mm-hmm. I think Raheem Mostert might be my favorite run back in a Jared Goff lineup because of the matchup, because of his ceiling in that matchup against the Lions, and because of his $5,900 salary. You combine that with the $5,500 quarterback, you get to fit a lot more. And I'm going to use that to transition into running back because I'm comfy with Raheem Mostert at $5,900 in cash lineups as well. I think basically he's going to need to get hurt to not deliver for us against the Lions, who are 29th in run defense DVOA. Now I'm going to go ahead and knock on wood here in my pod studio that I didn't just jinx Raheem Mostert and hurt his knee for him. But I mean, you know, we can't plan for somebody to get injured anyway.
Yeah, I like Mostert. I think he makes sense on Goff teams. I think if you're playing Goff, you want Miami to jump out to a lead, which would be good for Mostert, and that would force Goff to have to throw the ball, you know, more than the Lions would probably want him to. So I think that definitely makes sense. Mostert won't make my cash lineup. He's just not quite in my top 3 this week. I'm playing Tony Pollard if Zeke Elliott is out. I mean, you know, Pollard, he's not priced as a backup, but he's $6,100. Like if they redid the pricing now, he'd be at least 7,000, if not, you know, 7,500. Awesome spot for Pollard. The Cowboys' big home favorites against the Bears, who are 24th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA and 25th in adjusted points allowed to running back. So yeah, Pollard's a lock for cash for me. I'm also not gonna not play Derrick Henry in cash. Like this spot is too good. $8,400. I think it's probably a bit cheaper than he should be in this matchup. And as we've said, he is averaging 4 targets per game over his last 4 games. So you know he's not even, you know, a one-dimensional back at this point, which always helps on DraftKings with the full PPR.
Yeah, it's pretty loaded at running back this week. Like I said, I feel good about Raheem Mostert, but I can understand him not making it because in addition to those two guys that you mentioned, Kenneth Walker also looks like a pretty safe bet for touches and a high ceiling guy at $6,500. But that we haven't even talked about Josh Jacobs and Alvin Kamara, who top our DK dollars per point rankings. I mean, like who among those guys can you say does not have the ultimate ceiling to be that running back that you need to have? Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara, Kenneth Walker, Tony Pollard this week. Like, I don't think you can say any one of those guys stands out as definitely the one you have to have, but they all have the potential to score like the one you have to have. So I think that just like leaves plenty of room to pair things up however you want to. I do think that that makes it a little bit easier to fade Tony Pollard for tournament lineups once we get over there, because I don't think that, he beats all of these guys we just talked about besides Mostert in salary, but I don't think that he beats all of those guys in either floor or ceiling.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you could definitely make a case for fading Pollard this week because there are so many other strong running back plays. You mentioned Josh Jacobs and Alvin Kamara. I think one of those two guys will be my third running back in the cash games. I think they're also in play for tournaments. Kenneth Walker, you mentioned, he's another guy probably won't quite make my cash lineup, but I think he's a great tournament play. And then I think, the last guy to consider in tournaments, Saquon Barkley, I think is just going to go overlooked on this slate, but he's reasonably priced at $8,100. He gets a Seattle defense that's 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So, Barkley is another guy who has the potential to lead all running backs in DK points this week.
I'm going to jump into the lineup generator right now so that I can see what the ownership projection is on Saquon Barkley for the main slate, just to compare him to the guys that I have down to mention in the tournament section. So Saquon Barkley projected right now at 16%. That's what I thought. He came in kind of high. So the last two guys that I want to mention for tournament possibilities are Jonathan Taylor at 8,000 in DK salary, projected for 8% ownership right now, tied for 12th at the position in that category. And Christian McCaffrey, $8,700 on DraftKings, 4% projected ownership right now. Both of these guys are facing negative rushing matchups. The Rams and the Commanders are second and fourth in run defense DVOA respectively right now. But we're talking about two of the best running backs in the league. So we don't care about that matchup, especially here where we want ultimate ceiling. And Jonathan Taylor is off the injury report this week, so it doesn't seem like the ankle is going to limit his playing time the way it might have last week. Christian McCaffrey faces a tough defense. He also faces a defense that already allowed him 158 total yards earlier this season when he was playing in a worse offense under a worse coaching staff. So both of those guys are definitely worth mixing into your plans. I know we've got a whole lot of running backs, but if you can get Jonathan Taylor or Christian McCaffrey at, a very low level of ownership in a tournament, then they're definitely not guys to ignore.
Yeah, totally agree. If I, played like the Millie Maker or tournaments like that, I'd be mixing in Taylor and McCaffrey at those ownerships. Just the tournaments I play, I'm more willing to, go with these chalkier, better value running backs. But I think there's definitely a case to be made. Both those guys should see. Taylor especially. I think it's, as much as I'm not going to say I'm excited to play Sam Ehlinger, but I'm going to play him. Like, I think it's going to be a Taylor-centric game plan. I would not be surprised if he gets like 30 touches on Sunday against Washington.
Wide receiver for cash, just like running back, it seems to me like there are a lot of options here, Jared. Yeah. You look at the top of our board, you get Justin Jefferson, you get DeAndre Hopkins. I think it's easier to get to Justin Jefferson than usual in cash, even at 9,100 because of that cheap QB, because we have Tony Pollard. If you play Raheem Mostert, even more so. What do you like for cash at wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, the way I'm building, I'm playing those more expensive running backs, so I don't think I'll be able to get up to Jefferson. I'm starting, my first two guys in are going to be Chris Olave and DJ Moore. $6,000 for Chris Olave. He's averaging 11.8 targets over his last 4 full games. He's averaging 19 DraftKings points per game in those 4 games, and he gets Vegas, who's 30th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, by the way, look like they're going to miss this game again. So, Olave, I think, is again a good bet for double-digit targets. And then DJ Moore, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting to last week, but he got the targets, which I think you're going to continue to come because there's no one else for PJ Walker to throw to. Moore is still just $5,300, and he's up only $400 from last week. And then he gets Atlanta, who's already dead last in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. And then they're going to be missing their top 2 corners in this game, AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward. So I just think it's a good spot for DJ Moore. I feel pretty comfortable with him at that price tag.
Yeah, I agree. Chris Olave, DJ Moore, pretty easy to play for cash this week. I would lean away from DJ Moore in a tournament lineup, both because I'm not sure that the ceiling is there and he's headed for high ownership, it looks like, based on early projections.
Yep.
But as you mentioned, Falcons are a terrific matchup. Washington's also a terrific matchup, as we mentioned, for quarterback. So I think Michael Pittman at 7,200 is in play for that Sam Ehlinger lineup. Certainly not a must the way that we might like to lean toward a top wide receiver for our quarterback, because again, the reason we're playing Ehlinger is not because we expect passing success, but because he's cheap. I think you could certainly stick with just Olave, DJ Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 6,900. So, again, that's a pool of wideouts, and there are other guys that are in play that we didn't even get to here, but there's plenty to choose from. You can let the lineup generator help you sort through those. Jared, I want to highlight a player for tournaments at wideout that's very similar to the running backs that I talked about. Cooper Kupp is projected for single digit ownership at $9,600. He's playing a team that's good on defense. He's also playing a team that he already hit for 14 catches and 122 yards this year. If we look last year, he caught 11 passes twice out of 3 meetings with them. The other time, Cooper Kupp had a very disappointing day, only 7 catches for 118 and a touchdown on 7 targets in that week 18 meeting. So we're looking at 4 straight meetings of 118 plus yards against this opponent, and yet he's headed for single digit ownership. I think that even if he gets out of the single digits, he's not going to be high because of all of the options that we talked about and because the game itself is not exciting. It's 7th on the main slate in projected point total. So, just like with Jonathan Taylor and Christian McCaffrey, targeting them because of the lower than usual ownership, that's exactly the reason that I would go after Kupp here this week.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I don't think he'll reach double digits. I think people would rather play Justin Jefferson up there, and I think people would rather pay up for Derrick Henry at running back than going to Cooper Kupp. So I like that idea for tournaments. I like Brandon Cooks for tournaments. He's had a disappointing season so far, but he's down to $5,900. Nico Collins is not going to play in this game. Nico Collins has seen 14% of Houston's targets over the last 4 games now. I think Cooks is going to pick up at least some of that. And he gets Tennessee, who's 29th in adjusted points allowed to wide receivers. So I especially like Cooks as a run back on your Derrick Henry teams. I think that little mini stack could work out well in tournaments.
I definitely hope that it does, for the sake of all of my season long, not all of my season long teams, but for the sake of my season long portfolio on whole. Tight ends for cash. Jared, is it really Noah Fant week? Because that's what the lineup generator is telling me.
No, I have him as a tournament play. I think he's an interesting tournament play. But again, one of the reasons we like playing a quarterback priced like Sam Ehlinger is we don't have to go that low at tight end. We can get Tyler Higbee or Pat Freiermuth into cash lineups pretty easily this week. Higbee's $4,200, Freiermuth $3,900. They're both really nice target bets for those price tags. I feel a bit safer with Higbee just because we've seen the target volume more this season. Freiermuth has missed a few games. Higbee obviously coming off the down week, 6 game before the bye, but he was dealing with that ankle injury that game. He's off the injury report this week, so I think he's going to be back to his 18 to 22% target share. He caught 10 of 14 targets in the first game against San Francisco. And then if you need to save the $300 to get down to Freiermuth, he has a 22.5% target share in his 5 healthy games this season. And the Eagles are not quite as strong against tight ends as they are against wide receivers. So again, I think Freiermuth is a good bet for 6, 7, 8 targets on Sunday.
Yeah, it's the only position that the Eagles are a positive fantasy scoring matchup so far. It's not a strongly positive, but it's the only one where they're in positive territory. And like you said there at the end, I expect there to be plenty of passing volume because I think Pittsburgh is going to be trailing perhaps desperately for much of this game. Irv Smith, I think at 3,500 is also in play here on the salary side. And I agree with you. Noah Fant pops at the top of the DK dollars per point because of that $2,800 salary, but he is nowhere near a safe enough bet for targets to really be strongly in our plans for cash lineups. I don't think. I agree that he and Will Dissly are fine on the other side. I would lean Noah Fant over Will Dissly for a higher target ceiling, I think, but I can't argue that either one, that he's a that much better play over him. I do think that TJ Hawkinson is also in play for both formats, especially if the salary does not matter. 4,900, so he's a little bit expensive, but he's in a good spot, which we'll get into more on the FanDuel side of things. I like the matchup. For GPP, though, I also, in addition to the Seattle guys we talked about, Irv Smith, who we talked about, is facing a Cardinals defense that's second most friendly to tight end scoring. Mike Gesicki is a name that I'm saying a lot more this week than it feels comfortable, but $3,800 facing the Lions. They are fourth most friendly to tight end scoring by our adjusted fantasy points allowed. He's got playing time, routes, and targets up over the past 2 weeks. So there's just plenty to point to as positive for Gesicki right now. And that's that strong salary in the matchup.
Yeah, Gesicki's 8th among tight ends in PPR points over the last 3 weeks, 7th in expected PPR points. So he's been getting nice usage, like you said. The matchup's good here. We like the game environment here. I think Gesicki is the way you differentiate your Tua lineups if Tua is going to be chalky. So, and I'm with you. I like Hockenson on the other side of that game. You mentioned Irv Smith for cash. I won't get to him in cash. I just don't feel good enough about the volume. But I do like him for tournaments. He's a guy you could double stack Kirk Cousins with Justin Jefferson and Irv Smith. And then I really do like Noah Fant for tournaments at the price tag. I mean, I still think he's a talented pass catching tight end, and Seattle's going to need someone to step up with DK Metcalf out. I think Fant is just as good a bet to be that guy as Marquise Goodwin is. I think, there's been some Marquise Goodwin buzz. I haven't heard a whole lot of Noah Fant buzz, but I'd rather go Fant's direction. I just think, he's a better player overall.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that it's not getting buzz is because they're crowded at tight end, but certainly being without DK Metcalf opens things up for everybody else. And hey, we already heard how this is going to be a tight end friendly offense. We just didn't realize it was going to be more friendly to Will Dissly than to Noah Fant. Defense, Jared, Washington sits up top, $2,600. They're facing a first-time starter at quarterback. We like the salary on Sam Ehlinger, but it's not hard to make the case for playing a defense against a dude who has never played an NFL game before.
Yes, and I'm willing to play a defense against my quarterback, especially in cash games, especially when they're both super cheap. I mean, Ehlinger minimum priced, Washington $2,600. Like you said, quarterback making his first start and behind a bad offensive line. The Colts are 27th in PFF pass blocking grades, 23rd in Football Outsiders adjusted sack rate. So good spot for the Commanders D. I'll be playing them in cash. Not a whole lot of D's that stick out to me this week. For tournaments, I do like getting up to the 49ers. I think they're actually underpriced at $3,100. The Rams have allowed the most DraftKings points per game to defenses this season. That includes 21 points to the 49ers back in week 4. The Niners had 7 sacks and 2 takeaways in that game, gave up just 9 points. I think, and they've given Stafford in this offense trouble for a few years now. It wasn't just that meeting earlier this season.
I think the defense on the other side too, the Rams at 2,700 against Jimmy Garoppolo was well within play, especially if Deebo Samuel is not playing. He's dealing with that hamstring injury, has not practiced yet. At least we don't have the Friday report yet. But if he's out, I think it's even easier to play. I think if we're looking for ultimate upside in a tourney lineup, the Eagles at 3,900 against Kenny Pickett make a lot of sense. And the Patriots at 3K against Zach Wilson and a Jets team that doesn't have Breece Hall anymore. I think if Breece Hall was there, I might be a little bit scared about the points that the Jets could score in this game. Yep. At this point, I'm really not. And I think that there's lots of upside to Zach Wilson.
Yeah, New England makes sense. If I'm going all the way up, I'd rather play Dallas for 4,000 than Philly. I just think Dallas's pass rush against that Bears O-line is going to be trouble.
I just think there's a better chance that Justin Fields is okay than that Kenny Pickett's okay in their respective games this week.
Yeah, I guess the argument for Philly would be you're probably going to get more pass attempts from Pickett than you're going to get from Fields. So more, interception and sack upside there. But, Fields has like a 15% sack rate already this season, and you got that Dallas pass rush. That's going to give him problems.
Oh, yeah. Certainly not opposed to the play. That's going to do it for this Week 8 DraftKings podcast. You can head over to DraftSharks.com now, play around with the lineup generator, and build your own lineups for DraftKings, FanDuel, and Yahoo. You can also find Jared's articles highlighting top picks for cash and GPP entries on DraftKings. If you're watching us on stream, stick around, take a 5-second break. We'll be back to talk about FanDuel play for the week. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, October 28th here at Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 8 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schaff. With me, as always, Jared Small. And Jared, before we get to the picks on this side, I got to be honest with the folks who are watching or listening and say that I'm not going to be playing any of these guys or anyone else on FanDuel this week. And that is because I've had the absolute worst customer support experience that I have ever had with any company with FanDuel. It started with me realizing at some point in July that they had suspended my account for suspicious activity, which I'm not sure how I could have been doing anything suspicious over that span where I was not even playing. I don't play any MLB DFS. I don't play NBA. I don't play hockey. I made some NCAA tournament bets on the sportsbook side. So maybe that was suspicious. Maybe me betting on the Chargers to win next year's Super Bowl back in January. Maybe that was suspicious. I could get, but nothing. I tried doing their, I told them about it. They give you the process where they're like, you have to give us 1,200 forms of identification. You have to show us a picture of your last kid. You have to send us a sample of your pet's stool. I did all that stuff. Haven't been reactivated yet. I let it linger for a while. I tried it again. Haven't been reactivated yet. Can't get anybody to answer me in email. Can't get anybody in chat to say anything different other than, oh, we're going to have you do the same thing you did before. I might be all done playing on FanDuel, but I care more about helping those who are watching or listening to us win on FanDuel than I do about, not pushing people to play on there.
It's just more money for you to play on Underdog and Sleeper and DraftKings. So there's plenty of options out there.
If I could get it back, they got it locked up. So yeah, that's my recommendation. Listen to these players because these are the people who I would play if I were on FanDuel this week. But if you have a choice, feel free to play your money elsewhere. I back it completely. So with that out of the way, Jared, quarterback for cash. What are you playing on FanDuel this week?
Yeah, I'm leaning Geno Smith right now, and I don't love him. I don't love any quarterback on this slate. Sam Ellinger is not discounted nearly enough to play in cash, or I think anywhere on FanDuel. But Geno Smith still just $7,000. No DK Metcalf obviously hurts, but again, I think that's kind of priced in here. He's quarterback 11 in FanDuel salary this week. He's quarterback 5 in our main slate projections. He has a healthy Tyler Lockett. Lockett was a full go in Thursday's practice, so he's going to be, he's over that hamstring injury. It looks like, we'll see what Marquise Goodwin does replacing DK Metcalf. But Seattle's tight ends have been really efficient this season. 86% completion rate for Geno Smith throwing to his tight ends, 9.0 yards per attempt. So I think those guys, Noah Fant and Will Disley in particular, can help make up for the loss of DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I agree. Geno Smith's my guy, 7,000 against the Giants, a top 10 scoring matchup for QBs. Geno's only had 2 bad fantasy outings so far, and those are just the games where he didn't happen to find the end zone passing. He had 80% completion rate in the first of those 2 games in the week 2 loss to San Francisco. He had 48 rushing yards in the other game, week 6 against Arizona. So even in real life, those games weren't horrible statistically. 2+ touchdown passes in every other game. He feels a bit safer to me than the other guys in the 7K range. I think you could certainly argue Tua at 7,700 if the salary doesn't matter. I think Derek Carr at 7,200 is okay against the Saints, but he hasn't been as good in real life or fantasy as Geno Smith so far. There are some issues in that passing game. So Geno Smith's going to be my guy for cash too.
I do think Dak Prescott has become a bit more interesting. If Zeke Elliott's going to miss, I think that's going to push Dallas a bit more towards the pass. That's kind of my knock against Dak this week. I'm not sure how much he's going to have to throw, but I think he's okay if you wanted to go his direction in cash at $7,200.
Yeah, I won't argue strongly with that, but that's not the way I would be going in the hypothetical scenario where I have an active account on FanDuel and I'm playing. On the GPP side, Jared, I'm not sure any QB approaches Jalen Hurts in ceiling on this slate, and that might make him the guy that we need to play here. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible if he has one of his 2 rushing touchdown days and he throws for 2, he's going to be in the GPP winning team because we have no Josh Allen, we have no Patrick Mahomes on the slate, we have no Lamar Jackson. It's kind of Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, if you still consider him an elite quarterback. He hasn't been so far this season, and then a bunch of these middling guys. So there's definitely an argument to be made for Jalen Hurts. I'm not sure I'm going to get to him at that price just because I think if this is another blowout, we've seen they're willing to kind of just run out the clock in the second half of these games when the Eagles are winning by a whole lot, and I think that might be the case against Pittsburgh. I want to mention Derek Carr, who we didn't talk about on the DraftKings show. I think it's most likely that this is another big Josh Jacobs game, with the Raiders favorites against New Orleans. But if for whatever reason the Raiders either decide to go pass heavier or are forced to go pass heavier, I think Carr will have success against this Saints defense that's already 20th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA. They're going to be without Marshawn Lattimore again this week. It looks like that sets Devontae Adams up for a big game. So I think a Carr Adams stack is nice leverage off of Josh Jacobs, who is going to be pretty popular again.
I can understand the argument for it. I think I would be a little bit comfier with it if Devontae Adams weren't dealing with the bad flu this week, which, it might not challenge his availability for the game, but it very well might have him at something less than full strength. It's not a passing game I'm going to get to because of the other options that are in a similar range. And to me, Kirk Cousins is like the higher floor, higher ceiling version of that at 7,800 against the Cardinals. We can absorb any value from the Kyler Murray lineups with the Kirk Cousins play in that same game. We can play DeAndre Hopkins as the run back to get the guy who's apparently going to get 58% of Kyler's targets. Hopkins and Justin Jefferson top our FD dollars per point rankings. Adam Thielen's in play at 6,200. Irv Smith at 5,000 gets one of the league's worst tight end defenses. So I would be double stacking Kirk Cousins with two of his pass catchers and probably DeAndre Hopkins as well. The Cardinals D also plays the run much tougher than the pass and second highest opponent pass rate over expected for the season. So Cardinals opponents are throwing on them. The Vikings now are much more willing to go ahead and throw, even if they're not trailing, than they were under Mike Zimmer. You could check that pass rate over expected in the free article on draftsharks.com right now. It comes out every Wednesday. So just all that wrapped up, I like the spot for Kirk Cousins and all of the guys that you can play with him in that lineup.
Yep, I'm with you. Like Kirk Cousins as the tournament play. Then I'll mention Tua Tagovailoa here again. Gets this Lions defense. We've seen them get into shootouts, especially early in the season when their weapons were healthy. And we're going to get DeAndre Swift back for this game. Amon-Ra St. Brown should be cleared from concussion protocol. And then Tua, we've only seen the ceiling once in that Ravens game. But just watching this offense, like you can see it's explosive. Even in the game against the Steelers last week, like they got off to a hot start. They kind of sat on the lead for most of the rest of that game. But like we know, with Jalen Waddle, with Tyreek Hill, they're in a dome here on the turf. Like this is a game where Tua could go off and bring those pass catchers along with him.
Yeah, that game got so boring, I turned it over to baseball to get something more exciting. Running back for cash, Jared. Josh Jacobs is up to $9,000, but I don't think that's too expensive. He's still $1,000 cheaper than Derrick Henry. He's almost as good a carry bet. He's a better bet for targets. New Orleans defense used to be scary against the run, but they're currently just 19th in run defense DVOA. The Raiders are a slight favorite on the road. And I mentioned the unhealthy passing game. Darren Waller returned to practice this week, but he's still somewhere short of 100%. We have Devontae Adams with the bad flu. We have Hunter Renfrow playing through an injury. We have Mac Hollins playing through an injury. So unless the Raiders fall behind, it's tough for me to imagine them doing anything other than feeding Josh Jacobs until he's obese.
Yeah, we should mention too that Jacobs is on the injury report this week with the foot, and he's been limited so far. If he's limited again Friday and listed questionable, I think that takes him out of cash consideration. But I agree. My guess is they're just taking it easy on him. They've given him a ton of touches over these last 3 games, so we'll see if he's full go Friday and not on the injury report. I'd feel comfortable with him in cash, but Alvin Kamara and Tony Pollard check in right now as our top 2 values at running back. So I'll be playing those 2 guys probably along with Josh Jacobs in cash lineups. Pollard's going to take over as Dallas's lead back, assuming Zeke Elliott misses this game. He gets a Bears defense that's 24th in Football Outsiders run D, 25th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. And we did get that game in 2020 that Zeke missed, and Tony Pollard played 90% of Dallas's offensive snaps in that game. It's going to be Kadre Allison and Malik Davis behind him on Sunday if there's no Zeke Elliott. So I think you could get, an 80-90% snap rate out of Tony Pollard again this weekend. And then Alvin Kamara, $7,800. That's just underpriced for the volume he's been getting over the last 4 games. 17 carries and 7.8 targets per game over his last 4. Gets a below average Raiders run defense on Sunday.
Yeah, I just now learned that Kadre Allison is on the Cowboys. So we're going to go ahead and play Tony Pollard and not assume that they're going to give somebody else the usual Tony Pollard workload. I also love Raheem Mostert across formats here, road game versus the number 29 run defense in DVOA. Derrick Henry's probably going to be somebody that's restricted to the GPP side for me here because of that $10,000 salary. Maybe that changes if Josh Jacobs is, not in our cash plans because of that foot, but still 10K is a lot to put on Derrick Henry here. Projected for single digit ownership though, because of that. He's facing the league's number 32 run defense in DVOA. He has topped 200 rushing yards in each of his last 3 meetings with Houston. Now, None of those came last season because Derrick Henry got hurt before each of the meetings with Houston. But again, the Texans are the worst run defense in the league right now. Titans over the past 4 weeks, meanwhile, have been the 4th most run-heavy offense by pass rate versus expected. So we know they're going to run a lot. We know Derrick Henry's probably going to be successful on those runs. He's somebody that you want to have in your plans. Just it's a matter of figuring out exactly where and how it fits.
Yeah, he's like my 4th favorite running back for cash. So I probably won't get to him as long as Jacobs' foot is okay. But yeah, I definitely want some exposure to Henry in tournaments. I like Raheem Mostert in tournaments. Another guy who, like, value-wise, you could make an argument for him in cash games as well. I just think there are better bets this week, but I definitely want to get some Mostert in tournaments. He's good leverage off the Dolphins pass game. If you don't want to play Tua, who's going to be pretty chalky, you play Raheem Mostert and just hope he gets touchdowns instead of them going to the passing game. And then I think Kenneth Walker is interesting in tournaments too. He's up to $8,400 on FanDuel. So he's coming in at just 9% projected ownership, I think, because of that price tag. That might be a fair price for this guy the rest of the season. Walker has 21 and 23 carries over the last 2 games. He didn't see a target last week, but his route rate was up to 62%. If it stays in that area, like, he's going to, get a few targets per game, which is going to help. And then he gets the Giants on Sunday. New York is 30th in Football Outsiders run defense DVOA, giving up 5.7 yards per carry to running backs so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably Nick Chubb for a team that doesn't have a Kareem Hunt, right? So it's a fair price already, I would say.
Yep, agreed.
Wide receivers for cash, you see the same trio leading the dollars per point board as on DraftKings. Justin Jefferson, DeAndre Hopkins, Amon-Ra St. Brown up there. Cooper Kupp pops here as 4th in dollars per point. He was much further down the list on the DK side. But I don't see much difference between him and Justin Jefferson on FanDuel. They're separated a little bit in salary, but they're both great bets for targets, great bets for production this week. I think you can chase the target certainty of those guys. You can play Jefferson and Cooper Kupp in a lineup and skip on those high-priced running backs we talked about, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs in particular, because both of these guys are in the 9K range over here, but they give you the same thing that we like in those high-priced running backs, in that we chase those guys because we love the certainty that they're going to get touches. That's Jefferson and Cooper Kupp. They are absolutely going to get targets in their game, so they make sense as high-dollar cash plays.
Yeah, I mean, no argument against those guys from me. I'd probably rather go with the higher-priced running backs and save a bit at wide receiver, especially on FanDuel, where it's just half point per reception. I do think there are nice, mid-range priced wide receivers this week. I do think DeAndre Hopkins is a nice play after, he caught 10 balls on, 14 targets in his first game back. I like Chris Olave here. Talked about him on a DraftKings show. I think $6,900 on FanDuel is also a nice price. The guy has 11.8 targets per game over his last 4 games. No Michael Thomas or Jarvis Landry again this weekend. So, Olave should dominate targets again for the Saints. And then, in the low 6Ks, I think DJ Moore at 6,200 and I think Brandon Cooks at 6,100 are decent values if you need to get a cheaper wide receiver in there. I think both those guys are pretty nice target bets. Cooks, especially with Nico Collins out this week, there's really not much else to throw there in Houston now.
I agree with that. Olave over 13 FanDuel points in 4 straight games now. Raiders are the 2nd best scoring matchup for quarterbacks, 3rd best for wide receivers. And Olave fits particularly well if we do have a healthy Josh Jacobs ready to go in our cash lineups. You get value at wide receiver plus the correlation with the Raiders running back for that game. GPP side, I mean, all the guys that we mentioned so far are in consideration for me here. Another that I want to throw in is Tyler Lockett. The hamstring, even though it's better, he was a full practice participant on Thursday. So not worried about that overall. I think that's still enough to keep him out of my cash plans, because we've certainly seen guys that we thought were healthy tweak their injuries in that game anyway. But $7,600, he's affordable enough. Like I said, back to that full practice. So not really worried about that injury. He could be flooded with targets in this game, which we expect DK Metcalf to miss at this point. Giants are a neutral scoring matchup for wide receivers. Seattle passing game is not going to get overplayed because there's nothing highlighting this particular spot. And Kenneth Walker, I think, is probably still going to be the highest owned Seahawk for FanDuel tournaments, even if it's lower than he is on DK. So there's a bit of leverage there, but really it's just a matter of betting on Tyler Lockett when he's set up to get as much as Seattle wants to give him.
Yep, I like Tyler Lockett for tournaments. I'm with you. I'd probably stay away from him in cash. I like Adam Thielen for tournaments too. You mentioned him as a potential Kirk Cousins stack. I like that idea. You can play Thielen even outside of Cousins lineups. He's only $6,200 on FanDuel. He's seen 7+ targets in 5 straight games now. He's 18th, Thielen is, among receivers and expected fantasy points over the past 5 games. So he's been getting, wide receiver 2 level usage. I still think he's a pretty good touchdown bet, especially for the price tag. And again, we like the Vikings passing game in general against Arizona this week.
I want to mention too, even if you're not playing a Miami or Detroit lineup here, I think Jalen Waddle is worth a look as a standalone option from that game. He's going to be rostered a lot less than Tyreek Hill in the same situation that we like for Tyreek Hill. Easier to fit Jalen Waddle into a lineup at 900 cheaper in FanDuel salary. And he might not have as good a chance at ceiling as Tyreek Hill. I think Tyreek Hill's a better bet to get those targets. But I think if we're looking at just the 1 week ceiling for each player, I think Jalen Waddle's 1 week ceiling is just as high as Hill's 1 week ceiling.
Agreed.
Tight end for cash. What are you doing here, Jared?
Oh, Dallas Goedert. I mean, $5,900. That's just like a disrespectful price tag. I mean, I think we want some exposure to the Eagles on this slate. I mean, they have a 27-point implied total. That's second to actually Miami, who has the highest implied total. That's another argument to play these Dolphins guys. But to me, Goedert's a good value way to get some exposure to the Eagles on this slate.
I'm going to have to say that I don't think Dallas Goedert is my guy for any format on here. He's not safe enough for me for cash. 7th among tight ends in target share, which is fine. 12th among tight ends in targets per game because the Philly doesn't have to throw the ball a whole lot. He's behind Tyler Higbee in both of those categories. And that's significant, I think, because Higbee's just $100 more expensive here. So it's not a big difference to fit one of those guys. I think Higbee's the safer bet. Goddard's topped 6 targets once. He has 3 games of 3 or fewer catches, and Pittsburgh is 3rd in coverage DVOA against tight ends. So it's not a great individual matchup for Goddard here. And then if we're looking at tournaments, the ownership level is going to be too high for me to prefer Goddard there. So I think he's just going to be a guy I fade. Like, I'm not worried about Dallas Goedert this week in redraft. I'm happily starting him. But here where I care about the, floor versus other individual teams, or where I'm chasing ceiling and trying to get guys that not everybody has, it just doesn't work for me.
I have no argument against Higbee. That the half PPR saps some of his value. I just want to play Goddard. It's more fun to play Dallas Goedert. He actually runs routes more than 3 yards downfield. But I'm with you. I think Goddard's a good fade in tournaments if he's actually going to come in at 17% ownership. There's actually quite a few tournament tight ends I like this week. I mean, TJ Hawkinson, is priced just above Dallas Goedert and Tyler Higbee. He easily has the best matchup among those 3 guys. Miami 26th in adjusted points allowed to tight ends. Football Outsiders has them 23rd in tight end coverage. So I think Hawkinson's a nice, pretty easy pivot up from Dallas Goedert.
Yeah, I think that if I find that $400 doesn't really matter in salary, I'd rather play Hawkinson across formats here. I think he's probably got a higher ceiling than Goddard here because of the team facing a pass funnel defense. It's a home underdog. Again, the matchup is better for him. So I like Hawkinson across formats. And I'm going to mention Mike Gesicki one more time because apparently I'm a big fan now. 5,400 for him here, facing the number 4 defense in adjusted fantasy points allowed, 2 tight ends, 2nd worst defense in DVOA coverage against tight ends, 25th in overall pass defense DVOA. So even if you're like, yeah, Matt, but we've talked about how Mike Gesicki's not a tight end, he's a wide receiver. Fine. The the Lions aren't particularly good against any position in coverage here. So we've also got Gesicki pegged for low ownership. So even though it's kind of a spotlight matchup for DFS use, doesn't look like that's going to bring Gesicki's ownership level up too much. And as we've mentioned on shows the last 2 days now, he's coming off 2 consecutive 7 target games. And one of those was a game that they led the whole way against Pittsburgh. So it's not even like they were just chasing from behind both times.
Yeah, Durham Smythe's banged up too, which you might laugh at, but he's kind of been the guy stealing some routes and targets from Gesicki at times this season, so that would only help Gesicki's outlook. I'll mention Irv Smith one more time too. I think you mentioned him when you were talking about Kirk Cousins, but just $5,000 for Irv Smith. He's had a decent passing game role over the last 3 games now. He's been around like 60 to 70% of the pass routes. He's averaging 4.3 targets per game over that span, so not big volume, but enough. And he's used around the goal line quite a bit. And the Cardinals are 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends.
Yeah, certainly like the savings to help us, absorb any of the risk that goes with Irv Smith. And Jared, let me tell you that player injuries are never something to laugh at. So let's have some respect for Durham Smythe. Defense, Washington 3,400. We mentioned him on the DraftKings show. 3,400 against Sam Ehlinger. Sam Ehlinger might be awesome. He might be terrible. We're willing to bet on the terrible side at $3,400.
Yeah, struggling O-line for the Colts too, which I think makes Washington a pretty easy cash play for me. I do like the Colts on the other side of that matchup as well, $3,900. The Colts are favored in this game, despite Allinger being under center. Washington has the third lowest implied total on the main slate, so probably more of a tournament play. The Colts would be for me. I'd rather just save the 500 on Washington in cash, but I do think the Colts have just as much, if not more, upside in that game.
And according to the numbers in our lineup generator right now, it looks like those are going to easily be the two most rostered defenses on FanDuel this week. We'll see if that changes into the weekend, but I think that's probably enough to fade them because neither is a lock to score in tournaments. And I like the Seahawks at 3,500 against Daniel Jones. So the story, and probably an underreported story, is Daniel Jones not turning the ball over this year, especially relative to what he used to be. He's gotten a lot better at taking care of the ball, but past 2 weeks have seen the Seattle defense get a lot better as well. They ramped up the pass rush where the Giants are still vulnerable. They're allowing the third highest pressure rate in the league for the season. And the Seahawks have 2 takeaways in 5 straight games and 6 of their 7 games for the season. So this defense started out terrible. They have made some changes. They're playing a lot better the past couple weeks. I think there's at least a chance that the Giants have a tough game in this one.
Yeah, definitely possible. I mean, are you going to trust this 7-game sample size from Jones over what he showed us his first, 3 seasons when he was a sack and turnover machine? I mean, I think part of it is the Giants have been able to go run heavy in most of their games. But if you get Seattle jumping out to a lead, I definitely think there's still upside in facing Daniel Jones. I think this is a good week, too, in tournaments to pay up at defense if these cheaper ones are going to be popular. Dallas, home for Justin Fields and the Bears, is in a great spot, $5,000. Philly, home for Kenny Pickett and the Steelers, they're in a great spot. And then San Francisco, I think, who really has had the Rams number for the past few seasons now. And that defense had a big game against the Rams when they met back in week 4.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's going to do it for this Week 8 FanDuel podcast. Remember to go ahead and take your money out of FanDuel right now if you actually want to have it before they lock up your account. But if you are going to play on FanDuel this week, head to DraftSharks.com. You can play with the lineup generator. You can build your own lineups to play on FanDuel, on DraftKings, or on Yahoo. You can also find Kevin's articles highlighting top picks for the week in cash and GPP games on FanDuel. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Schaff saying thanks so much for swimming with us.